What's up guys, I'm Jake with East Coast Polishing. Today we're going to be introducing you to the new brass and copper kit coming from Renegade Products USA. So I'm going to jump right into the early on part here, which your first step is going to be sanding. Coming into here, the way we're going to start our sanding process on this is actually in one of these satin airways. These buffs are equivalent to about a 220 or 320 grit sanding pattern. They are a directional buff and you do have to keep that in mind. To mount your buff on your grinder at first, you're going to want to look at this flap here. You're going to want to make sure that this is rotating with your grinder. Your grinder is always going to have a marking of directional. You want to make sure that this flap is not going to be going against your grinding wheel. This grinder rotates this way or this way, so I have this so this flap will not be catching on anything. The first thing you're going to want to look for when you're doing this is these rivets. That's why we have this. There's a rivet line that goes along the top here. It's all about hitting multiple directions on these rivets. There's going to be one angle with your grinder going this way. You're going to be doing another angle with your grinder this way, and you're going to be doing an angle straight up. You're also doing an angle this way. There's a couple things to focus on with these rivet lines is they can be a little intricate for beginners. There is an actual bead of solder that goes along this line here. That solder line there, you don't want to focus on trying to get rid of. That solder line is okay to stay there. It's going to be a nice silver finish when we get done with it. Another thing you're going to want to focus on this rivet line here is when you end, you're going to want to end very straight, because when you cut, you're going to be cutting around this straight. You're not going to be cutting upwards on it. Another key point you're going to want to look for when you're using the satin airway is this lip here. These copper fire extinguishers are very popular to polish as they do have a great finish to them and they're a great piece for decor in the house. A big thing with these lips here is making sure to angle that satin airway in there. When I do the process, you're going to see me coming in with the entire grinder angled at an angle to cut one way, and I'm going to be angled another way in there. The other thing is these outer lips. Those can give people a little bit of trouble too. It's okay to come in with that satin airway from an angle back here, where you're going to be holding your grinder, going around it, and working this bottom edge. Those airways will take any of this bluing and corrosion off of here. Sometimes you do have to be patient. I would not recommend running that airway anywhere above 3,000 RPMs. You're going to want to be from 2,200 to 3,000. You're going to always want to make sure you're wearing PPE with these too. There's a lot of dust that comes out of this bluing here, so look for one of them full face masks, or at least wear a N95 respirator. Another key point you're going to want to look for is these top pieces. A lot of these fire extinguishers have a little mount on the side here, as that's how they were mounted back in the day, and a nozzle here. This nozzle was the tube where they would actually spray it. We take that off before the polishing process begins. Using that satin airway, you will be able to lightly get behind here. If not, this kit will include a couple pieces of 600 grit sandpaper. That 600 grit, it's okay if you wanted to kind of work it with your finger behind there. Usually there's not an abundance of corrosion behind there. It's very easy to scuff it up. If not all of that, your airway, you can focus a little extra heat and a little extra time in that area, and your airway will cut through any corrosion that could be on here at 3,500 RPMs. But it's just important to make sure you work your way around here. Be careful, because that buff will catch, it will move. You want to take your time and be nice and smooth around those spots. So after you use your satin airway, now you're going to be looking into some of our 600 grit Maverick Abrasive Savage discs. Now these discs are 5-inch. I recommend having some kind of DA or rotary sander. If you're going to be using a rotary sander, I recommend having a backer pad on it. That is a soft foam pad that's going to give you the ease to wrap more sandpaper, more contact. It's going to give you more contact area on the piece you're working on. It's also going to give you less chance of creating some kind of divot. If you're using a DA, you're gonna see that the paper has a slight overhang, and that's gonna give you a major advantage for getting in this groove here or getting next to this groove here with all of your solder on it. A major thing to focus on with your DA that you're going to see is around your rivets here, you're not gonna be able to get your DA pad quite into those. So when it comes to the cutting process, you're gonna be putting a little bit more time into your 121. You're gonna be doing a lot of angles up here when you're cutting, because you're not going to be able to proficiently sand next to these rivets and get that perfect, especially for the beginners. By these rivets here is where you might be struggling to get rid of those marks from your satin airway. So you're going to want to make sure when you're using your cutting disc on your pink single stitch buff, you're going to want to make sure that you're using multiple directions, and you're going to be going at a slow pace, lots of pressure at 3,500 RPMs. With that, you should be able to proficiently pull out any of those marks and have no kind of 320 marks left from that satin airway buff. Anyways, I'm gonna get into my 600 grit on a rotary sander, and I'm gonna show you how I proficiently go through this to get this smoothed out. If you do, for some reason, have some crazy scratches or dings or dents in your extinguisher, you might wanna consider looking into a heavier grit from us, as more like our 320 or our 400 grit. Our 600 grit is very efficient at pulling up very light, minor damages, but anything that might be a little out of the ordinary, you might wanna look into buying something like 320 to remove something that's a little bit excessive. So now we're gonna jump into actually buffing the fire extinguisher. We're gonna be buffing with 121 fast cut paired up with a pink airway with a single stitch. The biggest thing to remember is these fire extinguishers are soft. So as a pro, I like to do a lot of different angles on these to try and stretch it in ways that I like. So there are areas that you're gonna have to put more pressure into and more time into, as I explained earlier. Those key areas that you're gonna remember you wanna focus on are around your fire extinguisher end here, your mounting piece here, your rivets, this goalie, and this top edge here. Those are all a little difficult to sand, and a lot of people will struggle with it, but this buff paired with 121 at 3,500 RPMs will still pull those 320 marks out from that satin airway proficiently. So now I'm gonna jump in with my Q36. I've been putting the Q36 on a UBM buff. The Q36 on a UBM, I'm gonna run around 2200. The reason being for this is it's gonna help me knock down the hashing from that cut buff. The one thing you do wanna keep in mind with Q36 is it is a greasy rouge. The number one reason we're using this is to knock down the hash. When I cut, if you watched, I had my buff at a slight angle in one direction. That way my hashing is now kicked on somewhat of a 15-degree angle. This isn't necessary for everybody. This is just how I prefer to do my process. If you do want to run everything in a straight up and down line, that's more than acceptable. Me personally as a pro, I like kicking at a 15 for my cut. I'm gonna come in now with my UBM and my Q36 at 2200 RPMs, and I'm now gonna run this at a straight up angle to knock down that cut hash, and now all I have is this UBM and the Q36 hash. Some people in some scenarios will walk away from one of these after this step. If you want that extra pop and finish, you're gonna be using our next step, which is going to be our Show Shine finish buff with the purple Show Shine compound at around 1800 RPMs. And that is going to get you the best results with the most minimum hash you can get. Anyways, I'm going to rake this out now, and then I'm gonna add that Q36 rouge to it. For this again, 2200 RPMs, our cut was at 3500. So before we get into our finishing, our last step, I like to take the mini buff. These come with your kit. I have a yellow 20 ply. I'm gonna put a little bit of Q36 on this, and that's how I'm gonna get this last little bit underneath the stem here, and I'm gonna get underneath this actual clip here. Those two pieces are a little intricate, and it's really hard to fit a buff back there, so these mini buffs are a perfect key player to get those out. Q36 should do just the job to get all the material clean behind there. So you guys had seen me go through the 2-inch, the mini buff up in here. It worked great around that latch. Now you're gonna see me take a 4-inch mini buff, and I'm gonna go behind the stem here just to clean up any of that little triangle of material you're gonna get built up. The biggest thing to keep in mind with these is you don't want to move fast, and you don't want large lines, or I guess large steps. These buffs like to be moved nice and slow. You can run them down at a lower RPM than you would think, or you can run them at a high RPM. When you run them at a high RPM, they're gonna get very stiff on you. When you run them at a low RPM, they're gonna get a lot of flex. If you look at what I'm doing right now, this buff is actually flexed a lot. And that is how you'd get behind that. So now, after you've done out all your accents, and we've got our Q36 done, our 121 done, you're gonna pick up the bottle of Renegade Show Shine. You're gonna use it on your applicator pad, and we're gonna put a nice thin layer around this everywhere that we're going over with our finish polish. This is also great for general maintenance. These shouldn't see a lot of abuse, as these make a great mantelpiece in your house. Hopefully, you won't be repolishing it very often. But That show shine is great to have in stock. Put it on our applicator, spread it around. We're gonna go with our hash on this, and we're just gonna create a nice thin layer on our copper. After we've applied our show shine finisher, we're gonna let that set up on the metal for 30 seconds to a minute and a half. Once it starts to cure, you're gonna see it kind of create a nice haze. Once that flash period is over, then we can take our show shine finish buff plus our purple show shine finish bar at 1800 RPMs. We're gonna rake the buff quick, apply compound from the outside to the inside of our buff, and then we're going to go over this piece and hit it with our finish to give it that luster and effect. Luster and deep, rich shine. So after I finished my last stage, this isn't included in this kit for this product, but I ended up trying out the whiting powder from Renegade. This is actually a really simple process. You just open up the top, you're gonna take your rag, dip it in there, it's white, and you're gonna use this to remove any kind of excess compound or excess residue. This is typically only used at the tail end of the polishing process. The reason being is this isn't gonna strip any of your sealants or chemical properties that we've put onto this using our Forge Red, Easy Red, or any chemical that we have that seals our products. This isn't gonna do any kind of scratching, and this is gonna ensure that we don't remove that. Compared to our dissolver is what is meant to be used between the polishing process, and that would actually remove any kind of chemical sealant properties that we have on our products. This is definitely a product I'm gonna be including in my shop soon.